I tried to put for you the relationship, let's say, between chemical technology, chemical engineering, and the TRIZ features. So I took some, like for example, 32 says ease of manufacture. Now, I thought that as a chemical technologist, what would be my understanding of ease of manufacture? One could be that feedstock availability, reaction complexity, workup complexity, process safety. These would all be part of ease of manufacture. Okay. You could also look at adaptability or versatility. What you're talking about, process flexibility. I mean, how flexible is your process? Do you have sufficient latitude? Or is it very, very stringent in terms of how you specify parameters? Okay. Take loss of time. Loss of time, okay, 25. Okay. I viewed loss of time as it could be plant maintenance, that every time I go for plant maintenance, there's loss of time. There could be regeneration steps. So if a catalyst has to be regularly regenerated, very frequently, there would be loss of time. There could be plant failure, which could lead to loss of time. Or suppose I make many products and I'm switching over from one product to another product in a batch process, there could be a loss of time in batch switchover. So those would be all examples of loss of time. Take, for example, reliability. Reliability may mean process robustness. That is I'll always reliably make my product, and I can execute my process with high reliability, or it could be very finicky and unreliable. Sometimes it gives you a good product, sometimes it doesn't. Same with product robustness. Is your product very stable at different temperatures, or do I have to store it at low temperature? Like, for example, this has become a major issue with the coronavirus, the vaccines. There are some vaccines which require extremely low temperatures to preserve, like the Pfizer vaccine. So the product robustness in that sense is not very good. Imagine if I have to take the vaccine to a village, how do I ensure that it is kept throughout at minus 30 degrees centigrade temperature? It may not be so easy. Productivity, it could mean process throughput, how much of material I can push through a reactor in a given time, batch cycle time, manpower productivity, that's also productivity. Loss of substance, it could mean conversion. I've got less conversion, I've got less selectivity, so there's loss of substance. I may have a lot of losses while isolating a product, So those would all be examples of loss of substance. Loss of energy, I've got a very energy intensive process, and so it would be a lot of loss of energy, or wastage of energy if I don't recover energy, Object affected harmful. Slightly, the term is a bit confusing, but let's say if a product is hazardous, and it can cause harm to the environment, So object affected harmful. Object generated harmful. If in generating the object, in producing it, there are a lot of harmful things. Mr. Ashwindani, the owner of Asian Paints, called me up at night. He was very worried how they're going to manufacture paints in future, because there is a UN directive that, they have all got to reduce their carbon footprint, And so we were having a long chat about what will be the future of the paint industry. So, there could be carbon footprint, water footprint, environmental factor, how much of hazardous material or whatever are you producing per kilogram of product, the air emissions, liquid emissions, solid waste, all of these could be a part of it. Okay? Is that clear to everyone? Is everyone clear what these things mean?
Yes, sir.
I just took a few and did it. It would be wonderful, if you can take some of these features, and see what is the relevance in terms of chemical technology. Are you able to see it for all or for some? And so please have a look at it. Let us come back to principles by which you can actually solve most problems. We will try and understand them. Let's take the first one, which is segmentation. The other thing about Altshuler is you have to stretch your imagination a bit, and one word, that segmentation, can mean many things. So your ingenuity partly lies in your ability to see the broader picture. Can you look at segmentation in very different ways? So let us try and look at first some which are obvious, like for example, I can divide an object into independent parts. Suppose I've got a mainframe computer. I can replace it with many personal computers and have parallel processing so that it approaches the job that is done by these giant mainframe computers. And so I have segmented this large computer into many small computers. Or you take earlier days, what did you have? You had a truck, and at the back of the truck, you had the place where you dump things, okay? But the moment people came up with the concept of a truck and a trailer, I can actually disconnect the trailer and then reuse my truck for something else, while the trailer is being emptied or whatever, And so that's very interesting. Use a work breakdown structure for a large project. Like for example, in the BASF Bosch thing, what did they do? They realized that the ammonia synthesis is a large project and it has things like you have to look at feedstock. Where will you get your hydrogen and nitrogen from? You have to look at the catalyst. Where do I get an abundant low cost catalyst? Or you have to look at the reactor which was blowing up and you have to look at the design of the reactor. In other words, I'm breaking down the large problem into smaller problems. And then you are assembling groups, which are then looking at those very specific problems. You can look at the Bosch reactor innovation as a classic case of segmentation. What did he do? He replaced his conventional high pressure reactor with a lining and a jacket. By that, he was able to solve the problem of attack of the perlite of the steel, and formation of methane, etc., which took place. Okay, so very very nice example of segmentation. Let me tell you, Bosch, etc., did all this long before Altshuler. Altshuler is basically drawing on such clever work, and he has been able to find numerous cases where people have done segmentation without knowing that they've done segmentation. So he was able to collect thousands of patents which had some similarity, and that's how he came up with his concepts. Then make an object easy to disassemble. This is also segmentation. So use temporary workers on a short-term project so that after the project is over, everyone just goes off. You are not saddled with permanent manpower. Okay, flexible manufacturing systems, modular furniture. You'll find there's a big hall. One day it is used for as a big auditorium for a conference. Then they partition it in a different way and it is used as a marriage hall. And so I can assemble a furniture in different ways. I can have a furniture which is once a sofa, next time at night it's a bed. So I can disassemble containers. I can take one container, replace it with another container in a transport vehicle. I've disassembled it. I can also look at it in terms of fragmenting something in very interesting ways. Like, for example, and which is very relevant now, empowerment, segmentation of decision making. So you are empowering people. You're not just having a top-down decision-making approach, Everybody has been empowered. Or I've fragmented so much that I might be teaching in Nerul, but maybe the distance learning will be available to thousands of people. And so that's again a kind of fragmentation, or the virtual office remote working, which has become so important today. So segmentation can mean very, very different things. When you are looking at a principle, look at it more broadly. Don't look at it in a very narrow way, and that's basically what I've tried to do. Sometimes, I don't know whether my way of looking at it is necessarily right, and what Altshuler would have thought about it. But at least I felt comfortable doing it. Take the another principle, say number two, taking out. Let's look at what it means. Separate an interfering part or property from an object, or single out the only necessary part or property of an object. What does it mean? Like, suppose, let's say, in earlier days we had the normal ACs, where you had that air conditioner in your room, and you had to put up with that entire racket, of the AC operating. It was quite a nuisance. Okay. But when people realized that inside my room, I only need the cold air, I don't need anything else. All the rest is the paraphernalia to enable me to get cold air. And so the moment they could do this, they basically had a split AC. You can look at a split AC as partly a segmentation, that I've split up the noisy compressor from the piping, etc., which is uh, pushing the cold air into the area where it is required. And also I can look at it as a principle of taking out, where I took out the noisy compressor outside the building, and in the inside I only left the cold air. Or take this example, it's very interesting. Okay. Like, say for example, in it's still quite common when people say beware of dogs. And why do they do that? Because of a thief. Thieves, etc., may come and steal all your stuff, and you keep a dog, big Alsatian or whatever, and you put those notices, beware of dog. And the moment a thief sees that, thief gets scared, okay, whether to enter, because the dog might bite. But people also realize that maintaining a dog is not so easy. I mean, it's quite a problematic thing. You have to feed the dog, you have to take out the dog, etc. And they said that what is scaring the thief? What is scaring the thief is the barking of the dog. So if I've got a sensor, the moment it sees, or a thief is coming, and it senses, and it activates an alarm, and that alarm is basically the barking of a dog, and so I've got a burglar alarm where I've recorded the barking of the dog, but I don't actually have the dog. So I took out the dog, and I only left the bark. Or like, let's say in our in farms, where birds are coming and eating all the crops, and then you put the scarecrow. What is a scarecrow? It looks like a human being, but it is not. But it still scares the birds. The birds think it's a human being, but it's not. So you have taken out the live stuff and you have left something which still has an impact. So that is taking out. Okay. Let me tell you about an application of taking out in our own work. And let me tell you, at the time that we did this, neither did we know taking out or TRIZ or anything. And I'm going back to around 2004 or so. But then when I was preparing the lecture, I realized that actually what we did was something related to taking out. So I will mention that. But before that, I will take you through a slightly more convoluted presentation, just so that you know the context, of how it all happened. It's not enough to just say, hey, this is the invention. How a thing happens is also important to know. Around 1999, Pepsi, at that time, had come into India, they were very interested in doing contract farming, in North India, and especially for things like potatoes, tomatoes. Why? Because Lay's potato chips was their company, and God knows how much potato chips are sold in the world. And so they thought that they must make, they must also cultivate the potatoes, and so they wanted to get into potato chips. And likewise, there was another Pepsi company which is known as pedigree food. So there's a packet of pedigree food. The stuff inside is something that dogs like to eat. It is chewy. It has got a meaty texture. So dogs like that. The stuff that gives that meaty texture to the material is a seaweed. It's a gum, and this particular gum has got this property. Our institute, where I was the director, was into all kinds of research around seawater, including cultivating things in the sea. This man, Dr. O.P. Mayer, is a visionary. He had gone to Japan on a sabbatical. He had come to know about the seaweed which was being grown in Japan, and he asked the professor there that can I take a small strand, and I want to do some research on it in India. So he brought that back under quarantine, and then he was able to show that this stuff can be adapted in Indian waters. The original work was done in Dwarka. Later on, of course, we went to southern part of India. In fact, this picture is from South India, near Rameshwaram. So what happened was we were extremely lucky because when Pepsi came to grow potatoes in North India, they were also interested in this stuff, which till that time was growing in countries like Indonesia, Thailand. But Indonesia had a big problem that they used to regularly have cyclones, tsunami, etc. And sometimes the entire cultivation would get wiped out. And so they were interested in seeing if there are other countries where they might be able to grow this. And so when they came, we said, yes, we will be able to grow it. Dr. O.P. Mayer has got this. Maybe we can try and do a large scale cultivation. We also had some natural seaweeds which gave this material. Unfortunately, the total stock was very limited. So we knew that that cannot serve the purpose. But initially, it was important because it got Pepsi interested. Within a year or two, we licensed the technology to Pepsi. You can see Pepsi to cultivate seaweeds to bolster export basket. 2002. We could grow this over hectares of water. So that was great. And we were very excited because there was no pressure on agriculture land. It doesn't require fresh water for irrigation. It's all seawater. And also, we did not require any fertilizers or pesticides. What better for agriculture if you can dispense with all of this? So this became a very big thing, this stuff. Now, at that time, we faced a problem. We used to harvest it, we used to bring it to the coast, and then it used to be dried just like you dry fish. Then it was being packed and baled, and it was being at that time exported to Hong Kong, where the factory for making this thickening agent was and this food. But the problem was that during the monsoon time, we could not harvest. I then left a question with my colleagues that is there any way, uh, an alternative way of drying? One of my colleagues, Dr. Ishwaran, um, suddenly had a very bright idea. He took the stuff and put it into a kitchen blender. Later on we realized that about 92% by weight of the fresh seaweed is water. So he put it into the blender. It's not very different. Like if I take grapes and if I crush it, naturally I'll get juice. Or orange, if I crush it, I'll get orange juice. So not very different. So he crushed it. It all became like a liquid. And when I visited that area, Mandapam, near Rameshwaram, where we had a field station. Ishwaran showed me this stuff and said, "Sir, I got this liquid." And then what he did was he applied that liquid in various plants, green gram, chilies, uh, mango, etc., and found that these are growing very well. All these plants. So that word got out that this is a fantastic organic fertilizer. I told Ishwaran, that is great. But Pepsi came to us for the thickening agent, And where is the thickening agent? He said, I don't know, sir. Where is the thickening agent? And then I looked very hard at his flask, and I could see small bits of particles all over the flask. So I asked him to filter it, and then what we found is that in those particles we had the gum. You know, so we had that gum. So there was no problem. It was very granular material, and the liquid then became a fertilizer. So in one stroke, we ended up making two products from this seaweed, whereas originally it was only one product. That then got sold as a fertilizer, the liquid.
So what exactly were those particles?
You see, all parts of the plant are not soluble. Okay, so the insoluble part are mainly cellulosic material. Hmm. And inside those cellulosic material, this particular phycocolloid, this stuff was present. Okay. Now, this stuff has a very interesting property that in the cold, it is not soluble in water. But if you heat it up in water, to about a temperature of 70, 80 degrees centigrade, it dissolves in water. So when we were processing the seaweed at room temperature, it was insoluble in water. So it had remained in that particulate material. Okay. So the particulate material was basically all this kind of cellulosic material plus largely this particular material which is not soluble under ambient conditions. So that was nice, and then Pepsi licensed this new technology from us. Okay, and you can see PepsiCo buys tech on growth nutrients from seaweeds. And it was a big thing. And why was it a big thing? Then they carried out numerous trials, with that liquid in numerous crops, commercially important crops, corn, potato, paddy, wheat, name it. Okay, and they got substantial increases in the yields of the various crops. And these were done by different people. Not all of it by Pepsi. You can see Madras University, Techno Tubers, Producers Association, Renuka Sugar Mill. So there were various people who did all these trials. There was this very interesting article, which came out on Pepsi's magical spell on crops. And it mentioned over here that this technology is completely Hindustani and that it was licensed from our institute. I've still not come to where it's taking out, so just bear with me. It was such a big thing that there was a parliament question after this, and by that time we had got our patent also granted. So we had obviously done something for the first time in the world, in introducing this technology. Okay, now what happened was at that time, Dr. Abdul Kalam, our former president, had come to know about this work. He called me to the Rashtrapati Bhavan and said that he wants to know a bit more about this. And another reason was because Dr. Abdul Kalam was from that. He was born in Rameshwaram. So when he heard that this is being grown in that area in southern India, so naturally he got even more excited. Then he told me that these are my scientific colleagues. They will talk to you and try to understand more about what you have done and what is this technology, etc. And he left me with his team, and they were all very brilliant people who were working in DRDO and many other people from ICAR and all kinds of people. Once we had spoken to them, they went and spoke to Dr. Kalam, and Dr. Abdul Kalam, he said that I want to speak about this in my Technology Day address, And so on 11th May 2006, he spoke about 5 minutes on television about this particular technology. And let me tell you, side by side with important things like the BrahMos missile. So the BrahMos missile and this stuff were covered back to back in the same Technology Day address delivered by Dr. Abdul Kalam. And what did he say? This highly innovative process of producing two useful products from the fresh harvest of the seaweed is being done for the first time in the world. And that really appealed to him, that it had such a potential impact and that it can create lakhs of jobs. So that was of interest. When I was discussing this with the team of Dr. Abdul Kalam, there was a very perceptive person, Dr. Brahm Singh. Dr. Brahm Singh told me, Dr. Ghosh, this is all very nice and we can see that it has created a huge impact. But why does the seaweed work so well? Why does that liquid work so well on plants? We had already carried out some work which we published in Journal of Agricultural Science and Food Chemistry. I told him we have analyzed that there are many different growth hormones, in that liquid which we have identified. There were auxins, cytokinins, gibberellins. These are all growth hormones. And I said that it must be because of that. And the second was we knew that this liquid has a lot of potassium in it, very rich in potash. The seaweed actually selectively takes potassium from the seawater. Okay. So he said, oh, I see. And then he said, he was a botanist, and he said, my understanding is that it is not always a very good thing to have all growth hormones together, because some of them could be antagonistic towards each other. They may not necessarily all act in synergy. And he said, take it from me, I'm telling you this from my vast experience. And that was in around 2006 when we had this conversation. This conversation was always in my mind. And I said, Dr. Brahm Singh has said this. Is there any way in which we can look at the merit of what he's saying? I said, is it possible to selectively take out these growth hormones one at a time? So you leave one, take out two, or leave two and take out one. And that's the kind of idea that we had in mind. Around that time, we also had another very commonsensical innovation that the analytical method which was developed, which was already a literature method of selectively taking out these things only for the purpose of analysis, we thought that maybe it could also become a operation for a actual chemical process. We were then able to make substantial amounts of modified liquid, that sap, which selectively we had taken out one thing. Okay, we took out the auxins, we took out the gibberellin, we took out the cytokinin. And what happened was that when we took out the gibberellin, from the sap and left everything else there, something rather miraculous happened. And all the study was done on maize, corn. So what we found is that it did not affect the yield of the corn. We got more or less still the same kind of yield that we got with the normal sap. But when we took out the gibberellin, the biomass increased by about 25%. So we had a lot more vegetative biomass. And those were the days when people were getting interested in cellulosic biomass for making bioethanol. Cellulose was a thing that people were looking at. And we, in fact, ended up getting something like about 20 to 23% extra biomass for nothing, for free. Just by what? Taking out. We took out the GA3 and listening to Dr. Bramsingh. Okay. So, we did use the principle of taking out, not originated by us. And I later on thought that, yeah, it does fit in. And maybe the gibberellin for this application can be considered as in a way, a problematic part, which I have taken out. So let me take the third one, which is called local quality. Now, it says change an object structure from uniform to non-uniform. Okay? Change an external environment or external influence from uniform to non-uniform. So from uniform to non-uniform, that's what you need to remember, because we are all very used to things which are uniform. Like, for example, most of our paints, our walls, okay, you'll find that they are all of a single color, a smooth coating, okay, that is uniform. Now, what has become very popular now are textured coatings. What have you done is the same paint, but you have made the texture non-uniform. Okay, and a lot of people find this very attractive. Okay, so it sells a lot. Okay, this kind of paints. It's a premium product. Not only related to the paint, but it has a lot to do with the brush that you use to apply the paint. Okay, so one example of going from uniform to non-uniform. If there are so many cases where you may have, say, a product with a uniform density, or you could have a product with a non-uniform density. You could have something with a uniform pressure, or you could have something with a non-uniform pressure or a non-uniform temperature. Or take when you are doing high pressure liquid chromatography, HPLC, it's very common to have what is known as gradient flow. That is, you take two solvents, one which is polar, one which is non-polar. Initially, you might find that some of the compounds are coming out with the non-polar solvent, or if it is a reverse phase, it will be with the polar solvent. And gradually you'll have to take out the other constituents, which will come out with the opposite solvent. So if you started with a non-polar, you'll have to progressively go into polar, or if you started with something polar, you have to progressively go into non-polar. But that's what you do in gradient HPLC. You vary the concentration of the polar and non-polar, vary their ratios. So you are really going from uniform to non-uniform. And what that does is that it makes the quality of the separation much better, and you can separate much faster. Or another example of going from uniform to non-uniform, like let's say school kids, their lunch box, okay, their mother might have given them some hot food as well as cold food, or some liquid. So if you can have some compartments, which are insulated, so that the hot food remains hot, the cold food remains cold, and there's also provision for liquids. And in fact, it's very common nowadays, these thalis that you get, where they'll put the sambar and the rasam and everything in different compartments which are liquid, which can keep a liquid. So they put a wrapping on top, and it's liquid. It's a very nice example of going from uniform to non-uniform. This was something which I was involved in, and so I thought I'll just mention. It was a very interesting concept, which was mooted around 1991. I think it came probably from one of the food companies. At that time, what we call today as TV dinners were very popular. That is, people would come back from their office and they would just pick up something from the fridge, a tray full of food which they bought in the supermarket, and put it in the microwave oven, and warm it up and then eat it. Okay. Now, the question was not very different from this lunchbox concept, but the idea was that suppose, let's say, I have a tray and I put it in the microwave oven, and let's say in my tray, suppose I have an ice cream. I also have rice, which is pre cooked and needs to be warmed, and I also have some things which are semi fried and I will need to fry them. The microwave has to interact with these foods in somewhat different way. So, can anyone tell me if I want to keep my ice cream frozen as ice cream in the microwave oven, what can I possibly do?
You can construct a compartment surrounding the ice cream section
Yeah,
containing liquid refrigerant. So as it will vaporize.
I understand what you are saying. Can you think of any other possible solution drawing on your compartment idea is good. So you made a compartment. Okay. But can you get something simpler?
Compartment which does not allow microwaves to pass through it.
Fantastic. So what kind of a thing will not allow microwave to not pass through or get absorbed? What are the three things that can happen to a radiation when it interacts with matter?
Absorption, transmission, and reflection.
That's it. That's it. So if I do not want my microwave to interact with my ice cream, that wrapping around that compartment must be a completely reflecting type of packing, right? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So it just reflects the microwave, and my ice cream will remain cold, provided it's thermally insulated. The compartments. If I want to fry something, and if I want to cook something like boil it like rice, what would be the difference between the two?
Mainly the medium. Like when we fry, we generally use oil or something, and for boiling, we generally use water.
Right. Anything else? See, in a way, actually, when you're frying, you have very high surface temperatures. That's why your surfaces get brown and the interior doesn't really get brown. And that's what happens when you're frying, where you want a very high local temperature, surface temperature. What you would like is a microwave dash film. What kind of film?
Absorption, absorptive film.
Absorption. I wanted to absorb. Okay? Whereas if I want the rice to be cooked, the dal to be boiled, I must allow the microwave to get transmitted, into the bulk of the food, okay, so that it cooks the food. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
I hope you can understand how a concept from food, which affects millions and millions of people, is converted into a scientific problem. I was heading a part of the strategic research in England at that time in ICI, and we found there is a physicist in the University of Manchester who was the expert in the world in actually measuring the transmittance, reflectance, and absorptance of microwave radiation. Like we all know how to do it for visible radiation, okay? So he was an expert for microwave, And so we worked with him, and my colleagues started creating these types of special films, with these kinds of properties, and we could actually make a tray where we could demonstrate this kind of microwave susceptive film. So again, going from a completely uniform tray to a non-uniform tray and creating all kinds of special effects. Take other very interesting examples. Make each part of an object fulfill a different and useful function. So pencil and eraser. Earlier, we used to have the eraser, we used to have the pencil. But the moment they put an eraser on top of the pencil, it became easy. You didn't have to carry both. You had the eraser with you, or you're hammering something, but you also need to pull out the nails. So you have a nail puller and the hammer both together. Or, all these Swiss knives and various things where God knows how many different things are put in one unit. I can scale fish, I can use as a plier, I can have a screwdriver, I can cut, chop, whatever I want to do. Okay, I can cut wire, various things. Again, it's a question of going from something which is uniform to non-uniform. So I hope you can see the breadth that you can cover. One hand, something like this, on the other hand, something like this. So when you look at these principles, look at these in a very imaginative way. Do not look at these things in a very mundane way. Then you will not be able to innovate. But once I'm able to see all kinds of things as an opportunity around going from uniform to non-uniform, you'll probably end up inventing. Okay? Now, take another principle. Let's say the principle of universality. Now, here, what we had was that of course, not so different from this part, where you are making an object fulfill different and useful functions. Here, slightly different. What you're doing is make a part or object perform multiple functions, eliminate the need for other parts. So suppose again, like if I've got a toothbrush, automatically you assume that you'll have to have a toothpaste. Typically, it's another tube of toothpaste. But if you have a toothbrush with a hollow handle, and you can actually fill it with toothpaste, and so I can squeeze, and the toothpaste can come onto the toothbrush. Or when a child is sitting in the car, you put the car safety seat. The child is protected in the car. Moment you take the kid out of the car, that safety seat, with some simple things opening up and closing, it becomes a stroller. And so I don't need to separately have a stroller and a safety car seat. I have combined it. Not very different from the sofa cum bed. Today, when people are short of space, so many people, they use the sofa during the day, and at night it becomes the bed. So you're making the thing perform multiple functions. But multiple functions can also go. It could have a different meaning. Like for example, you could have somebody who's a multitasking sort of person. Who can do many things. Take a team leader who's also the timekeeper, recorder of the lectures, etc., etc. Take your CR, your class representative. That person has to sometimes perform multiple functions. So it's really complying with the principle of universality. Today, I think nothing epitomizes the principle of universality better than the mobile phone. It's just mind-boggling what all you can do with a mobile phone. I remember the first time I saw a mobile phone it seems such a great thing that you could make a call while on the go. But who would have imagined all the things that you can do? You can even make your mobile phone into a microscope today. I mean, there's no end to what you can do. Now you can record your blood pressure, your pulse rate, anything. There is nothing that I know which has quite reached the level of a mobile phone in terms of performing multiple functions. But these are all things which are known, and you will have to always ask, can I think of something which I can do, or have I done something which fits into these principles? And I remember I'd gone to Haridwar and we had gone to visit somebody's house, and out of all things in Haridwar, we were talking about mobile phone and how destructive they are, and how people are constantly talking on the phone and wasting so much of time. And just at the spur of the moment, an idea came to my head. But the idea which I was thinking was that while you're speaking to someone in the phone, suppose there was some kind of a superimposed wave which you don't notice, but let's say it is of the right wavelength that it gives you a fantastic brain massage. And the more you talk, the more intelligent you get. I mean, I'm just joking. If you can do something like that, that'll be very interesting. So that would be again around the principle of universality. I'm sure if I go and look in the prior art, you'll find that somebody or the other has probably already thought about it, because there is very few things that others have not also thought about. Let me take you through another example from our own work. You see, I mean, we really had never heard of these terms, but you actually do these things that you don't realize that you're doing it. And it had something to do with an RO membrane. So let us see what is an RO membrane. RO membrane has a non-woven fabric, and over that you apply a layer of a porous polymer like polysulfone. After that, what you do is you apply a very thin coating of a polyamide by interfacial polymerization. What was known was that you take an amine like metaphenylene diamine, and then you react it with this acid chloride, and that's what forms the polyamide by an interfacial polymerization, and that's how this thin layer gets coated. One of the problems which we were aware of is that most membranes tend to foul up, and that's a huge problem. They work very well for a few months. After that, their performance steadily keeps deteriorating, and you'll find that it is because of some slimy bacterial layer or some inorganics and things like that which have gone into the membrane, and that's how they lose their efficacy. So what I was aware of is that when you take, say, molecules like a pyridine, and suppose I put in a methyl group, okay, so I quaternize it. You get a quaternary ammonium salt, and these kinds of substances are known to be biocides. That is, they can actually kill bacteria. The thought came to me, and the thought came when I was listening to someone's lecture, someone who had come to defend a project. And that guy, for some completely different reason, had made this molecule. And I told him, can you send me a few grams of this material? And he was perplexed why we would be interested. He did send me. And then I immediately asked one of my colleagues, can you make membrane with this instead of with this? Why? Because in this, the acid chloride is required. This part is not doing anything. It is just a support for these functional groups. So I thought, suppose if instead of the carbon it becomes nitrogen, and then we can quaternize it so that I make the membrane, and then I can also make it antifouling at the same time, and it worked. The concept worked. We could make the membrane much more antifouling than what is the pristine membrane. What did we do? We basically applied the principle of universality. That is, something is there to do one function. Can I make it do one more function? This was the only function, that this aromatic ring bears the acid chloride so that it can polymerize with the diamine. And all I said is, can you make it do an additional function of becoming anti-fouling while at the same time doing its main activity, which is to induce the polymerization? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let me take you through another example. This is very interesting also. It's called the other way around. This is also very interesting. Invert the actions used to solve the problem. Okay. So, for example, if two things have got jammed, okay, one is that I can hit the outer part, and I can expand it, okay, so that it comes out. Alternatively, I can cool the inner part, and I can make it become a bit smaller, and again I can take it out. So you can see that I'm just doing it the other way. And they say something interesting: bring the mountain to Muhammad instead of bringing Muhammad to the mountain. That's what is meant by the other way. Now, let us look at some other examples. Even until, I will say, maybe 10-15 years back, most of the trucks which used to come with material, it was a fairly tedious affair taking out things from the truck. Today, you just empty the container, you just turn it upside down. you know. So I don't have to necessarily scoop out things. I can turn the thing and let everything fall off. And you can see in terms of saving time, how much time that saves. Like if you're filling up silos, and you just bring in the thing, turn the truck container around, everything falls off and off it goes. Let me again take you through two examples. There was a project in, or I think 10 to 14 laboratories were involved in that project, and I happened to be chairing that committee. The idea was to make microalgal biodiesel, and that was, I think, around 2010, 11, or thereabout. What some of the laboratories had to do was that they were given some microalgae, and they were asked to try and grow it in their institutions. When I was reviewing this after maybe about 6 months of the start of the project, I found that very few people had made any good progress, And I said, why did you all make progress? And they said, oh, sir, it's so difficult to get seawater. We need 200 liters of seawater. The sea is so far away from IIT Kharagpur, and it's very difficult to get a tanker and this, that. I saw everybody talking about how difficult it is to bring seawater to their institutes. In a second, I said, okay, if you cannot bring seawater to your institute, I will have sea salt delivered to your institute. The idea was that instead of going to the sea and bringing seawater and then using it, after all, what is seawater? It's only water with all kinds of solutes in it, right? So if you were to completely evaporate all of that water, you would be left with the solids. You can take the solids, which are by volume will be much less, even a courier can take it, and then you just mix it with water and you will make your seawater again. What's the big deal? Why did we think about it? The reason is because our institute was already very well known for making salt. We are 9/10 of the way there when we are making salt. We are evaporating seawater and making salt. So after making salt and gypsum, whatever liquid was there, we found that we could actually pour it back into the salt and make more or less a sticky mass, not exactly a dry solid, but with a very, very low volume, which you can put in a packet and just send it to these people. And all they had to do is add water at their end, and they've got seawater. So, what was being made out to be a very difficult problem was solved. And how did we do it? We went the other way around. When we were talking about losartan, and I told you about one of the molecules, parabromobenzyl bromide, and a process was developed for making this, and the way it was being isolated was that the solvent was being stripped off. You were being left with a solid, and then one was doing again a very tedious purification. This was being done by the process of evaporative crystallization. Now, the other way around was, no, you just cold crystallize the material. You just chill the reaction mass. And when you chill the reaction mass, this stuff just falls off as a pure product, and the rest of the material that you get, your mother liquor, you just keep recycling, and it became a zero effluent process with a very, very easy workup of your reaction mass, And how did it happen? Because we went another way. I mean, instead of evaporatively removing solvent, we removed the product from the solvent by crystallization, cold crystallization. Okay, so that's another example of the other way around. I think a very good example is really how, let's say, one moved from the concept of a fixed bed to a moving bed. So it was, you can think of it as the other way around, from fixed to moving. That was in connection with the FCC catalysis, where larger oils were cracked into smaller fractions, and that was originally done by Woodry in a fixed bed. And there were subsequent innovations where they took multiple reactors so that always one reactor is in the regeneration mode, and that's how they made it continuous. And later on, they put the catalyst in a bucket, so they could move the bucket. Okay, so they basically did the reaction. When the catalyst got clogged, they shifted the bucket to the regeneration unit, and then they regenerated the catalyst, and that was done. But it was an innovation, but it was a rather crude kind of innovation. And subsequently, what was done was that the catalyst was made so fine that it could be actually fluidized. When the process stream was moving, the catalyst remained in a fluid state. It's almost like a liquid. And so when it was poured, let's say, from the top, and by the time it came to the bottom and it got deactivated, then it moved into the regeneration bed where it was regenerated, and again the catalyst was flown back into the original reactor. That's how the entire concept of fluidization actually began. And so it was an extremely important innovation, but I'm sure, of course, these people did not know about trees and things like that, but it was something that came to them, that why not convert a fixed bed into a moving bed. So that's an important example. Okay, I wanted to ask you, do any of you have any questions? Did you understand?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I hope you see the how interesting these principles, etc., are, and how it opens up innovation. You can just think in all kinds of exciting ways, around the principles.
If you ask me, what are the big problems or the big challenges today, I wouldn't even call 10. I would say there's only one problem, which is sustainability. Is it sustainable? Is our planet sustainable? Are our resources sustainable? There's nothing else that I see as all the other things are nice to have. Frankly, if you don't have, it doesn't make much of a difference. You won't die. And we have seen during the during the COVID times, during lockdown, how little you actually need to survive. You don't need a whole lot. Okay? But some things you need. You need food, you need some medicine when you fall in. There are some things you need. But other than that, I mean, you can more or less tide over the rest of it. I mean, they're not that crucial. Maybe you need your internet service, otherwise there's a problem. Okay. So, this is about another of those principles called blessing in disguise. And in fact, I feel good because I used this term once before around, I think 2007, in a paper where we had said, mercifully, this was a blessing in disguise, for in a context. Of course, this is a different context. What it says is that use harmful factors to achieve a positive effect. Okay? That's what we want. I mean, like for example, when we use the waste heat from the engine, okay, to carry out desalination, what did we do? We used a harmful factor to carry out or get a beneficial positive effect. Okay.
If it is hot enough, you can also use it for generating electricity, electric power. So you can run a turbine. All right. So that would be a nice example of how waste, which otherwise is harmful to the environment, can be used. You'll also find, especially when there are industry clusters, what you'll find is that many times you generate one waste and you don't know what to do with it, but then there could be another company, okay, which could find that as a useful feedstock for some process that they're operating, and so being aware, of what else is going on around you is very important, okay, and that could be another very interesting way of recycling waste materials.
There is a third which is very interesting. What it says is that amplify a harmful factor to such a degree that it is no longer harmful. I mean, it sounds a bit crazy, right? I mean, how do you do that? And I'll show you how we did that. Okay, I mean, later on when I was thinking, isn't that what we did in our case? And so, because this is the other thing. I found this TRIZ and all being taught in a very theoretical way, where everybody talks about these things and you ask, show me some examples. Yeah? And you're struggling to find examples. Okay? So I spent a lot of time trying to create examples. So these are not, you won't find it anywhere. I mean, these are all created. Okay? And I don't know whether I've interpreted it always right. Okay? But I mean, it wasn't bad. And I'll show you, one or two such examples. Okay, I remember about 2 years back, we had gone to see the tigers in Tadoba, and when you go around the forest, okay, what you see is this stuff. You'll find the road, okay, and next to the road, it's all burnt. Yeah? And then, of course, you have trees. The reason is because, you see, if you have a wildfire, yeah, wildfire requires fuel, right? And of course, oxygen, air, you can't do anything about, but the fuel you can. Yeah? So, what you should do is that, and what forest people had found out, much earlier, is that if you have a lot of grass, etc., just burn it off. Okay? So that, from one side to the other, it gets stuck somewhere and the fire does not propagate. You understood? So what did you do? You just excessively, right, destroyed the harmful effect, okay, by actually burning. Right? And so that it becomes now less harmful. All clear about the logic of it, and you imagine, I mean, these are not things that will be so obvious, but when I've got a principle in front of me, I will think about it. So that's how important it is. And in fact, TRIZ says that, use a backfire to eliminate the fuel from a forest fire. Come. Okay, so they actually anticipated that. And when I went to Tadoba, I took this picture because I was sure, that this is what those people are talking about. And it's serious stuff. Okay. Now, let me take you through another example in the context of using a harmful effect to the extent that it becomes not harmful. This is the solving process, okay? That this stuff that you see at the bottom. There are many companies in India, primarily in Gujarat, who actually produce soda ash, large amounts. One thing is that if you start adoring some of these great processes, then you'll never get anywhere. Yeah? I mean, you have to treat them with a certain level of disrespect. Okay. I used to always hear, oh, the solve, the ultimate process. And I always said, what's so great about this process? To me, it seemed like a lousy process. And why did I think it's a lousy process? The reason is because at the end of it all, it's true you're recycling the ammonia, but you generate a stoichiometric amount of calcium chloride. That is just being let out into the sea. And can you imagine calcium chloride going into the sea? Seawater has sulfate. It causes turbidity in the sea. So I said, this is not such a great process. And the fact of the matter is that many countries have banned the solvay process because of this problem of not knowing how to discharge it. So that was it. Now, interestingly, when we were analyzing seawater, what we realized is that seawater, of course, the primary things are sodium chloride and things like that, but it has got magnesium, calcium, etc., sulfate. And we saw that seawater contains about 0.011 molar of calcium and 0.029 molar of sulfate. This is another thing. I used to find everybody who's making salt and or talking about seawater, they will tell you weight percent, percent weight by weight. Percent weight by weight to a chemical technology is actually of no relevance. We only understand moles, right? Because then you can write equations. You can't write it based on. So I just converted into moles. By the way, this was very important because there was a company which was infringing on our patent, and we took them to task and we won the case. And one of the important things that I could convince the patent guy based on moles. That person understood what we were trying to say. Okay. So what is it? You see, I said, normally when you make salt, what you do is you keep evaporating seawater and it will, whatever has the lowest solubility product will come out first, right? So calcium sulfate will tend to come out. They're sparingly soluble. How much calcium sulfate can come out? Only to the extent of calcium, because that's the limiting concentration. So I said, wow, this is great. Here you have got calcium ion in deficiency, and you have got the soda ash process which is generating calcium chloride. Yeah? And many of these companies are making both. So why can't I put back calcium chloride from the solvay process back into seawater? I remember the humiliation I used to feel during those months. Simply because people thought I was the stupidest person, that why were we doing this? One reason was that salt has a lot of impurities like magnesium, calcium, etc. But I realized that the problem with salt, the calcium is really coming from calcium sulfate because it's sparingly soluble. There'll always be traces which will come out as you are crystallizing salt. Okay? So what happened was I realized that suppose we put in calcium chloride externally and take out as much of the calcium sulfate as possible before you crystallize salt, okay, that maybe it will reduce the amount of calcium in the salt. So in other words, what did I do? We use calcium to beat calcium. You understand? Okay? And people thought, it must be a lunatic, He's trying to reduce calcium and he wants to add calcium. Okay? And see, that's the advantage of also knowing a little bit of science a bit better than a layman would. Okay? It's always good to know what is solubility product, what is relative solubility. That I knew that calcium is not harmful as such, or will not stay. Calcium chloride is highly soluble, 60% weight by volume in water, whereas gypsum is sparingly soluble. That's the beauty, magic of compounds. So we did that, okay? And what happened? We ended up also getting 3 times as much gypsum, right? We trebled the production of gypsum, and then we ended up getting an extremely pure salt and reduced the problem of distiller waste, which had to be discharged. What we realized is that you cannot use all the distiller waste in this process. There's only a finite amount. Okay? But then suppose you say, I want to make edible salt, I want to make salt for chloralkali, and then I can maximize the amount of sodium chloride that I'll produce, and then I can use it all up. Do you understand how you can use up all of it? Okay? See, the amount of calcium chloride that you get is determined by the Solvay process, okay, and the amount of calcium chloride you need is determined by the seawater composition. The two are not necessarily related. And what we realized is that we can use about 1/6 or 1/5 of the total amount in this process. We don't want to dump excess amount of calcium chloride because that doesn't serve any purpose. So, in other words, if I could produce 4 times the amount of salt than what I require for my Solvay process, then I can use it all up. When can I do that? I can do it if, like let's say if I'm making edible salt, then I can put it in and I can make a purer salt. I can make salt for maybe the oil drilling application. I have to use it in many, many places and use it all up. So this is a very good example of amplifying a harmful factor, calcium, to such a degree that it is no longer harmful. Nobody would have in their right minds otherwise. And I was very confident that nobody is going to do this. And it turned out to be that. We got our US, European, all patents granted, okay, because nobody could challenge us. Because it was so non-obvious, okay, counterintuitive. Okay, that's the correct word. Year before last, I was giving a lecture somewhere. That lecture was on something totally different. But one person who happened to be present was the present secretary of the Gujarat Pollution Control Board. And he was earlier in Bhavnagar, so I knew him. So the person who was the chairman of that session, he asked this A.V. Shah, who's the secretary of the Pollution Control Board, that what he thought of the lecture, but that lecture which he was talking about is the lecture I gave, which had nothing to do with this. But he went off on a tangent and talked about something different. Can I play it?
Is Mr. A.V. Shah still in the conference? Yeah, I am very much there. So, Mr. Shah, on this very interesting presentation, what would be your top of the head comments? I must admire Dr. Ghosh, because I had an opportunity of working with him when I was in regional officer as a Bhavnagar. He was a director there in the CSMCRI, and I gathered some knowledge from him. The soda ash industry, Nirma, is the really zero liquid discharge industry compared to others. In real terms, Nirma is achieving zero discharge, which is invented by Dr. Ghosh. That ammonia bearing effluent, they are treating with the chloride. And it becomes a calcium chloride effluent which is used in the salt pan, where they are enhancing the recovery of the salt as well as they are getting the gypsum, calcium sulfate as a byproduct. And there is no discharge into the sea in real terms.
So what happened was, he was basically saying how this technology has made Nirma a zero effluent discharge company. What did we do? Okay. We just dumped some effluent, okay, from that into seawater, okay, and I mean that dumping of the effluent is per se not so novel, because there is a technology where it can be dumped into the sea bittern after making salt. But nobody ever thought of putting it into seawater to make the salt purer. And so, that had a huge effect. The impact is a ZLD. I mean, they've got 3 times the amount of gypsum. Can you imagine the sales from gypsum? And the downstream purification of salt became much less demanding. And so, huge amount of money saved. All from a stupid thing of adding more stuff, which is counterintuitive.
And we will also talk about later on when we cover the Ziegler-Natta catalysis, we will look at how Ziegler, he was miserable after he was basically transferred to a coal institute. But it actually became a blessing in disguise because it was basically the ethylene which comes out from coal liquefaction, which gave him the inspiration to develop the process for making polyethylene. Keep this in mind that these are all examples of blessing in disguise, and it's a very, very important principle as far as sustainability is concerned. Especially today, we all talk about sustainability, so it's very important. Let's take another, which is discarding and recovering. And this is again very important. Make portions of an object that have fulfilled their functions go away, okay, or modify these directly during operation. So, like for example, we take a capsule so that that bitter taste of the medicine you don't feel when you are taking the capsule, and then the capsule just goes away in your stomach. And there'll be a lot of food items also where you'll find that sometimes there is a hollow inside something. All these zeolites, etc., catalysts which are used, you actually template the material around something, and then later on you burn it off to create the porosity of zeolites. You could also look at discarding and recovering in other ways. Like for example, you're carrying out a reaction, you're crystallizing, okay, and you're getting your mother liquor, and you recycle your mother liquor, and you're left with then your pure product. So you're discarding and recovering, okay. Or take today biodegradable plastics, because what do you want to do? You want to use it, and later on, if for example, either you discard it, and then it decomposes and forms carbon dioxide, or better still, if the plastic can be recycled to monomers, or even to the polymer, that would be great, So those would be all examples of discarding and recovery. Take another very interesting example, parameter changes. If you have to transport oxygen or nitrogen or petroleum gas, if you try to transport it as a gas, obviously the volume requirement would be much higher. So you try to liquefy these, so that the volume reduces dramatically. Similarly, we have learned, for example, when you react chlorine with alkali, it forms bleaching powder. It does the job of chlorine, but you don't have chlorine there. Okay. Or hydrogen peroxide reacting with sodium carbonate to form sodium bicarbonate, which is used in detergents. You're not using hydrogen. So what did you do? You did a parameter change in terms of you actually change the physical state from maybe a liquid to a solid or a gas to a liquid or whatever. The other is of parameter change, that I can change the concentration or consistency for a particular effect, and I can also change the degree of flexibility of a product. So a very good example of this would be, like, let's say if I take polyethylene, okay, take your milk pouch or something like that. Now suppose I tell you I want to make a powder out of it. It's very difficult to crush, a pliable, flexible material and make a powder. But what you can do is, if you go below the glass transition temperature so that it becomes a hard solid, now I can grind it up and I can make a powder out of it. So that is known as cryocomminution. What did I do? I changed the flexibility of the product and before grinding. I can also change the flexibility in terms of temperature latitude. So for example, if I have to preserve, I want to store something, which is otherwise decomposed at high temperature, what do? I keep it at a lower temperature. So I increase the flexibility, I change the flexibility by lowering the temperature, and now I have got this latitude that I can transport it the way I like, or I can analyze it later. So these would be all. And in fact, today, there are people who are preserving sperm and they want to maybe have children 30 years later. And in fact, there are bizarre people. Some of them are preserving their dead bodies, with the hope that maybe some technology will come in the future where they might get revived. So all I'm doing is carrying out a parameter change.